In April of 1953, an ambulance pulled up to a small gallery in Mexico City. The back doors opened, and two men carried a stretcher inside. On the stretcher lay a woman in a long, colorful skirt and heavy silver jewelry. They placed her on a bed in the middle of the room, her own bed brought from her home that morning. Around her on every wall paintings, the same face in every one, her face. She was 45 years old. She could not walk, she could not stand, but she was smiling. Her name was Frida Kahlo. Before the year was over, doctors would cut off her right leg. But that night, she lay in her bed among her paintings and laughed with everyone who came to see her. She was lying in a gallery full of her own paintings. Every single one was a picture of her face. It started 46 years earlier, in a blue house with a sick child and a lost umbrella. Frida Kahlo was born on the 6th of July, 1907. She grew up in a small, quiet town called Coyoacán, just outside Mexico City. Her family lived in a house with bright blue walls. Everyone called it La Casa Azul, the blue house. Her father, Guillermo, was a photographer from Germany. He had come to Mexico as a young man and never left. Her mother, Matilda, was Mexican, with both indigenous and Spanish roots. Frida had 3 sisters. The house was loud and full. But when Frida was 6, everything went quiet. She got polio. The sickness came fast. It put her back in bed. For 9 months, she could not leave her bed. Her sisters played outside. She heard them through the window. When she finally got up, her right leg had changed. It was thinner than the left, shorter. It would never grow the same way again. The other children made fun of her. They pointed at her leg. They laughed. She learned early that her body would not do what other children's bodies could do. But she also learned that she could outlast anyone. She was stubborn. She got that from her father. She started wearing long skirts to hide the leg. She would wear them for the rest of her life. Her father refused to let her disappear. He pushed her to swim, to play soccer, even to wrestle. All of this was very unusual for a girl in Mexico at that time. He also taught her to use his camera. She learned to look through the lens and find the right moment, the right light. Frida spent hours in his dark room, watching images appear on paper like magic. Light and shadow. That was her first lesson in seeing. By the time she was a teenager, she was fierce and funny. She wore overalls instead of dresses. She argued with anyone who would argue back. In 1922, Frida was accepted into one of the best schools in the country, the National Preparatory School in Mexico City. Out of 2,000 students, only 35 were girls. Frida was one of them. She wanted to be a doctor. She studied hard. She read books about the human body. She imagined herself in a white coat helping people who were sick the way she had once been sick. At school, she joined a group of students who loved books, politics, and trouble. She fell in love with a boy named Alejandro. One day, she saw a famous painter working on a mural in the school auditorium. His name was Diego Rivera. He was 36 years old, large and loud. Frida was 15. She watched him paint from the back of the room. She told a friend, one day, "I am going to marry that man." 3 years later, on a gray September afternoon, Frida and Alejandro left school together. They needed to catch a bus home to Coyoacán. September 17, 1925. A gray afternoon. It had been raining earlier and the streets were still wet. Frida and Alejandro walked out of school together, laughing about something a teacher had said. The bus rattled along the wet road. Frida leaned against Alejandro's shoulder. Outside, the city moved past the windows. Shops, trees, people carrying groceries home in the rain. They were heading home to Coyoacán. It was a long ride by bus. They got on a bus near the market. The seats were wooden benches along the sides. The bus was brightly painted. After a few stops, Frida looked down at her hands. Her umbrella was gone. She must have left it somewhere. They got off. They walked back through the wet streets looking for it. They never found it. So they got on a second bus. This one was more crowded. They found seats near the back. Frida was 18 years old. She was thinking about medical school, about the future, about the rain. Alejandro was talking about a book. Frida was looking out the window. The bus turned a corner. An electric streetcar was coming from the other direction, fast and heavy on its rails. The driver tried to pass in front of it. He did not make it. The streetcar crashed into the side of the wooden bus and dragged it across the road. The bus broke apart like a wooden box. Several passengers were killed on the spot. Others died later at the hospital. Alejandro had only small injuries, but when he found Frida, she was barely conscious. An iron handrail from the bus had broken loose in the crash. It had gone through her body. It entered through her hip and came out the other side. She later described it this way: "It pierced me the way a sword pierces a bull." Alejandro and others pulled the rail out of her body. Frida screamed so loud that people on the street could not hear the ambulance siren. At the hospital, the doctors made a list of what was broken. Her spine in 3 places, her collarbone and her ribs, her pelvis fractured and split apart, her right leg in 11 places, her right foot crushed and pushed out of place. The iron rail had also torn through her abdomen and her uterus. She was 18 years old, and there was almost nothing left in her body that was not broken. For weeks, she lay in the Red Cross hospital. The doctors were not sure she would survive. Slowly, against everything, she survived. The doctors counted her injuries again and again. More than 30 broken bones. They said she would probably never walk. They said she should prepare for a life in bed. They wrapped her entire body in a plaster cast, from her chest down to her legs. Then they sent her home to the Blue House. She lay in the same bed where she had spent 9 months as a child with polio. The same room, the same ceiling. She could not move, she could not sit up, she could not turn over. The world outside continued without her. She heard the buses on the road. She heard birds in the garden. She heard footsteps that never came into her room. She stared at the ceiling for hours, days, weeks. The dream of becoming a doctor was over. She was 18, her body was shattered, and all of it began with an umbrella she never found. For 3 months, Frida lay inside the plaster cast. She could see the ceiling. She could see the walls, nothing else. Her friends came less and less. Alejandro wrote letters, but his visits grew shorter. The house went on without her. She heard her sisters in the kitchen. She heard the dog in the garden. She heard everything and could reach nothing. Her father understood. He had watched her lie in the same bed once before, when she was 6. He brought her his oil paints, his brushes, his colors. Her mother had a special easel built. It was small enough to rest on the bed, so Frida could paint while lying on her back. But there was a problem. She could not sit up to see what she was painting. So her mother attached a mirror to the underside of the bed canopy. right above her face. Now, when Frida looked up, she saw herself. Bruised, broken, wrapped in plaster, but alive. She picked up a brush and began to paint. She painted the only thing she could see, her own face. At first, the paintings were clumsy. Her hands shook. The brush felt heavy, but every day she got a little better. Every day the face in the mirror became a little clearer on the canvas. Something had shifted. The girl in the mirror was not the same girl who had boarded that bus. She was quieter, older, and she had found a way to speak without opening her mouth. In 1926, she finished her first self-portrait. She gave it to Alejandro. It showed a young woman with dark eyes and a long neck wearing a dark velvet dress. She looked calm, almost royal. Later, when people asked why she painted herself so many times, she always gave the same answer. "I paint myself because I am so often alone," she said, "and because I am the subject I know best." It would be her answer for the rest of her life. Every one of them started here, in this bed, with this mirror. Slowly, month by month, her body began to heal. Not fully, never fully, but enough. She learned to walk again. The doctors had said she might not. She limped. Her right leg was weak and thin. Her back ached every day, but she could stand. She walked slowly through the streets of Coyoacán, past the market stalls and the blue walls of her house. Everything looked different now, brighter, sharper. The girl who wanted to be a doctor was gone. In her place was something else, a painter. In 1928, a friend introduced her to the famous muralist. It was the same man she had watched from the back of the auditorium 6 years before. His name was Diego Rivera. She brought him her paintings and asked what he thought. He looked at them carefully. Then he said 2 words, "You have talent." Diego Rivera was 20 years older than Frida. He was tall, heavy, and famous across Mexico. She was small, thin, and walked with a limp that she hid under long skirts. He had been married twice before. He was known for his love affairs as much as for his murals. None of that stopped her. On the 21st of August, 1929, Frida Kahlo married Diego Rivera in a small ceremony in Coyoacán. She was 22, he was 42. At the ceremony, Frida wore a long green skirt and a blouse borrowed from her maid. Diego wore a suit that barely fit him. They looked like 2 people from different paintings. Her mother called them the elephant and the dove. It was not a compliment. Diego painted murals the size of buildings. Frida painted small pictures she could hold in her hands. He filled walls, she filled mirrors. When people came to dinner, they talked to Diego about politics and murals. Frida sat at the end of the table and listened. Sometimes she spoke. When she did, the room went quiet. But something between them worked. He saw her talent before anyone else did, and she was not afraid of him. Their life together was never quiet. They argued about politics, about art, about other people. Diego had affairs. It was not a secret. He had been the same way in every marriage before. She wrote letters home in Spanish. She drew small pictures in the margins. She missed her garden, her parrots, and the warm light of the blue house. Frida knew. She accepted it at first. Later, she would have her own relationships with men and with women. She hid nothing. But there was one thing Frida wanted that no painting could replace. She wanted a child more than anything. The bus accident had damaged her body in ways that no surgery could fix: her broken pelvis, her torn abdomen. In 1930, she became pregnant for the first time. The doctors warned her. Her body could not carry the baby safely. They ended the pregnancy. The iron rail from that September afternoon in 1925 was still taking things from her, 5 years later. Diego received mural commissions all across the United States: San Francisco, New York, Detroit. Wherever he went, Frida followed. She packed her long skirts, her silver rings, and her paints. In San Francisco, she met a doctor named Leo Aloser. He would become her most trusted medical advisor for the rest of her life. He examined her spine and told her something no one had said before. Her problems went deeper than the bus accident. She had been born with a defect in her spine. In every new city, people looked at Diego first. He was the great muralist. She was just his wife. At least, that is what they thought. In the spring of 1932, Frida and Diego were living in Detroit. Diego was painting an enormous mural at the Detroit Institute of Arts. He worked all day and most of the night. Frida was not happy. She missed Mexico. She missed the colors, the food, the sound of Spanish in the streets. Detroit was gray and cold. But she had a reason to stay. She was pregnant again. The doctors warned her. Her body was not strong enough. The broken pelvis, the damaged spine, the torn abdomen. Carrying a child was dangerous. She did not listen. She wanted this child more than she wanted safety. For 3 months, she was careful, she rested, she waited. For weeks, she could not paint. She sat in the apartment in Detroit and looked out at a city she did not love. Diego was working. He was always working. She was alone with her grief. On the 4th of July, 1932, she began to bleed. She was taken to Henry Ford Hospital. The baby did not survive. She spent 13 days in the hospital. The ward was quiet. The sheets were white. The ceiling was white. Everything was white and still. Diego visited, but there was nothing anyone could say. On the second day, Frida asked a nurse for pencils and paper. Lying in the hospital bed, she began to draw what had just happened to her body. The painting she made from those drawings is called Henry Ford Hospital. It shows a woman lying in a hospital bed, small and naked, bleeding. Around her float strange shapes connected to her body by thin red lines. A baby, a flower, a broken pelvis, each one a piece of what she had lost. The bed is tiny. The sky behind it is huge and empty. The woman is completely alone in the middle of nothing. 2 months later, in September, word came from Mexico. Her mother, Matilda, had died. Frida could not go to the funeral. She was still in Detroit, still recovering, still far from home. In a single year, she had lost a child and a mother. The bus accident had taken her body. Now life was taking everything else. The paintings from this period are unlike anything she had made before. Smaller, darker, more direct. A reporter in Detroit wrote a story about her art. The newspaper ran it with a headline that called her the wife of the master mural painter. That is all they saw, Diego Rivera's wife, not the woman who had just painted her own blood on canvas. In 1933, Diego was given a mural commission at Rockefeller Center in New York. He included a communist leader in the painting. The Rockefellers ordered him to remove it. He refused. They destroyed the mural. The couple returned to Mexico. They moved into a new house in the San Angel neighborhood. It was actually 2 houses connected by a small bridge on the roof. One for Diego, one for Frida. 2 houses, 1 bridge, that is how they lived. Back in Mexico, Frida and Diego settled into their two houses in San Angel. His house, her house, a small bridge on the roof between them. For a short time, things were calm. Then, in late 1934, Frida discovered something that broke her in a way the bus never had. Diego was having an affair with her younger sister, Christina. Christina was the sister she had grown up with, the sister who had visited her in the hospital after the accident, the sister whose children Frida loved like her own. Not a stranger, not a model, not one of the women at his parties, her own sister. The two people she trusted most in the world had betrayed her together. Frida moved out. She took an apartment in the center of Mexico City, alone. She cut her long hair short. She stopped wearing the traditional dresses Diego loved. She thought about divorce. She thought about disappearing. Instead, she picked up a brush. The painting she made about this time is called Memory, the Heart. In it, a woman stands with a hole through her chest. The heart is missing from her body. It lies on the ground at her feet, enormous and bleeding. She did not explain the painting to anyone. She hung it on her wall and let people look. Eventually, she went back to Diego. She went back to the two houses and the bridge. She even forgave Christina. Years later, they became close again. Going back was not forgiveness. It was a decision. She decided that the marriage, broken as it was, still had more inside it than an empty apartment. But something inside the marriage had changed. She no longer waited for Diego to be faithful. She no longer expected it. Once, someone asked about the two greatest disasters in her life. She answered without hesitating. "I suffered two serious accidents," she said. "One was the streetcar. The other was Diego." The streetcar had broken her body. Diego had broken something else. And yet she stayed, and yet she painted. For Frida, the canvas was the only place where she was completely in control. The paint did what she told it to do. People did not. In 1937 and 38, the pain from both accidents was still fresh. And yet, this was when Frida entered the most productive period of her life. She painted more in those 2 years than she had in all the years before. She painted a woman with a necklace of thorns. She painted a woman with her heart in her hands. She painted herself over and over, as if each portrait was a way of putting herself back together. The worse things got, the more she worked, as if the brush was the only thing holding her together. In the spring of 1938, a French poet named André Breton came to Mexico City. Breton was one of the leaders of the Surrealist movement in Europe. He believed in dreams and the unconscious. He came to visit Diego, but when he walked into Frida's studio and saw her paintings, he stopped talking about Diego. He stared at the self-portraits, the blood, the broken bodies, the open hearts. He called her work a ribbon around a bomb. He told her she was a surrealist. She disagreed. "I never painted dreams," she said. "I painted my own reality." But Breton did something more useful than giving her a label. He wrote to a gallery owner in New York. That same summer, an American film star named Edward G. Robinson flew to Mexico City just to see her paintings. He looked at what the water gave me, a painting of Frida's bathtub filled with floating images from her life. Dreams, memories, and wounds all mixed together. He stood in front of 4 self-portraits. Then he bought all 4, $200 each, $800 total. It was the first time anyone had paid real money for her work. She was 31 years old. Then came the letter from New York. A gallery on East 57th Street in Manhattan, the Julian Levy Gallery. They wanted to give her a solo exhibition, her paintings, her name on the door. In November of 1938, Frida traveled to New York, alone, without Diego. She wore her brightest Tehuana dress, heavy silver rings on every finger, flowers braided into her hair. She walked into the gallery on opening night. 25 of her paintings hung on the white walls. Self-portraits with thorn necklaces, bleeding hearts held in open hands, a woman lying broken on a hospital bed. Every canvas was a piece of her life. The room was full before the evening started. People lined up on the sidewalk. Georgia O'Keeffe came. Claire Booth Luce, the wife of the owner of Time magazine, came. Collectors and critics pushed through the crowd. They had come expecting the wife of the famous muralist. What they found was something else entirely. She had traveled across the ocean for this exhibition, and the man who invited her had done nothing. The paintings sat in a customs warehouse. Frida sat in a cold apartment. Time magazine called the exhibition the flutter of the week in Manhattan. In 2 weeks, Frida sold half of her 25 paintings. The president of the Museum of Modern Art asked her for a commission. So did Claire Booth Luce. One collector bought 2 paintings in a single evening. A journalist asked Frida if she was surprised by the attention. She said she was surprised that it had taken so long. Frida walked through Manhattan in her long Mexican skirts, and people turned to look. Not because of Diego, because of her. For 31 years, the world had called her many things: a sick girl, a wife, a shadow behind a famous man. Now they were calling her Frida Kahlo. The success in New York opened a door across the ocean. Breton invited her to show her work in Paris. Paris in early 1939 was not what Frida expected. Breton had promised to arrange everything for her exhibition. He had arranged nothing. There was no gallery. The paintings were stuck in customs. Nobody was ready. Frida was furious. She wrote a letter to her friend Nicola's Mure back in New York. She called the surrealists a bunch of crazy lunatics. She could not stand them anymore. But Paris gave her something she did not expect. She met Pablo Picasso. She met Joan Miro. She met Marcel Duchamp, who actually helped her organize the exhibition when Breton would not. And when the show finally opened, one painting caught the attention of the most famous museum in the world. The Louvre purchased her painting called The Frame. Frida Kahlo became the first Mexican artist to have a painting in the Louvre. The girl from the blue house, the girl with the thin right leg, the girl who lost her umbrella on a gray afternoon. Her painting was now hanging in the same museum as Leonardo da Vinci. She returned to Mexico, but the marriage could not hold. In November of 1939, Frida and Diego divorced. That same year, she painted one of her most famous works. It is called the Two Fridas. 2 versions of herself sit side by side, holding hands. One wears a white European dress. The other wears a traditional Mexican dress. Both have their hearts exposed. A vein connects them. One heart is whole. The other is cut open and dripping blood onto the white dress. It was the largest painting she had ever made, almost 2 meters wide. 2 women, 2 hearts, one body split in half. 1 year later, in December of 1940, Frida and Diego married again. In San Francisco, a quiet ceremony. The second marriage was no calmer than the first. They still argued. They still lived in separate spaces. But there were also quiet nights in the garden at the Blue House. They sat near each other without speaking. Sometimes that was enough. Through the 1940s, Frida continued to paint, but each year was harder than the last. She needed help getting dressed. She needed help standing up. But they could not stay apart. They had tried. It did not work. The years passed. Frida kept painting. Her body kept breaking. By the early 1940s, her back hurt every day. Her right foot ached constantly. She needed a wheelchair more and more often. She wore over 25 medical corsets throughout her life. Plaster, leather, steel. Each one held her spine together so she could sit, so she could paint. She decorated them. She painted flowers and animals on the plaster. She turned her cages into art. One corset had a hammer and sickle on the back. Another had a broken column where her spine should be. She made her pain visible, even when her clothes hid it. In 1941, her father died. The man who had given her his camera, his paints, and his stubbornness. Every year took something from her. A person, a piece of her body. But every year she made more paintings. Then, in 1950, the leg that had been thin since she was 6 years old finally began to die. Gangrene, that was the word the doctors used in 1950. The right foot that had been thin and weak since childhood, the right foot that the bus accident had crushed, it was dying. Frida was taken to the hospital. She stayed for 9 months, surgery after surgery. The doctors tried everything. They fused bones in her spine. They grafted skin onto her foot. Nothing worked. The infection kept spreading. Frida wrote letters from her hospital bed. She joked with the nurses. She drew pictures on her plaster casts. She refused to stop being herself. She set up an easel in her hospital room. She painted between operations with a mirror propped beside the bed. She had spent her whole life fighting that leg. Now the fight was over. The same mirror, the same position, the same face looking back, 24 years after the first time. By 1953, she had been in and out of hospitals for 3 years. She was 45 years old. She looked much older. A photographer named Lola Alvarez Bravo was a close friend of Frida's. She understood something the rest of the world did not. Frida was not going to live much longer. Some people cried when they saw her on the bed. Others could not stop smiling. She was dying and she had come to a party. That was Frida. Lola decided to organize something Frida had never had in her home country. A solo exhibition in Mexico City. She chose her own gallery, the Galleria Art Contemporaneo. She selected the paintings. She set the date, April. There was one problem. Frida's doctors told her she could not go. She was too weak. She needed complete bed rest. Frida listened, then she made a decision. She told her assistants to take her 4-poster bed apart and carry it out of the Blue House. They put it on a truck and brought it to the gallery. They set the bed up in the center of the room, among the paintings. On the night of the opening, an ambulance pulled up outside. The guests turned to look. The guests stepped aside. A stretcher came through the door. On the stretcher lay Frida Kahlo, dressed in her finest Tehuana dress. Rings on every finger, flowers braided into her hair. And there she was, lying in her own bed in the center of the room, surrounded by her paintings. She could not walk to see the paintings on the walls, so the paintings had come to her. The room filled with people, friends, strangers, reporters, artists. Frida talked to every person who came close to the bed. She held their hands. She laughed. The exhibition became front-page news. Newspapers in Mexico and around the world wrote about it. Not about Diego Rivera's wife, about Frida Kahlo. The brushes were heavy in her hands, her fingers shook, but the colors on the canvas were steady and bright. A few months later, the gangrene won. In August of 1953, the doctors told her there was no other choice. They had to cut off her right leg below the knee. The leg that had been thin since she was 6. The leg that was broken in 11 places when she was 18. Now, at 46, it was gone. After the surgery, she lay in the hospital bed and opened her diary. She drew a picture of 2 feet. Then she wrote a single line underneath. "Feet, why do I want them if I have wings to fly?" She was given a false leg to replace the one she had lost. It was plain, ordinary, hospital issue. She refused it. She had a better idea. Instead, she had a custom one made. It had a red leather boot, laced up to the knee, with tiny dragons and bells embroidered into the leather. Even a false leg, she turned it into something beautiful. She learned to take a few steps with the new leg, short distances, enough to cross a room. But most of her days were spent in bed now, in the blue house, where everything had started. In the final months, Frida was mostly in bed. The pain never stopped. She had survived more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime. Her body was held together by steel and plaster and stubbornness. 55 of those paintings were of her own face, staring back from the mirror above her bed. The last drawing in her diary was a black angel. Some people said it was the angel of death. Others said it was Frida herself, finally ready to fly. Diego came to see her every day. He sat by the bed. Sometimes he held her hand. Sometimes he just watched her sleep. He knew what was coming. One day, near the end, she picked up her brushes for the last time. She did not paint her face. She did not paint her broken body. She did not paint Diego. She painted watermelons, nothing else. Big, bright, open watermelons against a blue sky. The red was so vivid it almost burned. On the flesh of the largest melon, she wrote 2 words in dark paint. Viva la Vida, long live life. Below that, she wrote her name, the year, and the place. Frida Kahlo, 1954, Coyoacán, Mexico. It was the last painting she ever finished. A dying woman painting fruit. A woman in constant pain writing the words "long live life" on a watermelon. That was Frida. In her diary, she wrote one final line: "I joyfully await the exit, and I hope never to return." On the 13th of July, 1954, Frida Kahlo died in the Blue House. She was 47 years old. She had been born there 47 years earlier. She had painted there. She had loved and suffered there, and now it was over. They carried her body to the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City, where it lay in state. La Casa Azul, the bright blue walls, morning light through the window, a wooden easel in the corner, an empty chair pushed back slightly. And silence, nothing but silence,